People who work in human resources, what is the weirdest did you have seen? I once had a temp job in HR. I was scanning lots of old personnel files, and the one perk of the job was reading old complaints against people. The best one I came across was a mediation caused by one member of staff accusing another of witchcraft. She turned me into a newt. I got better. The maintenance guy had been living up above the ceiling of the building. He had built a little cubby living area with electricity and a small fridge and everything. Hey, that happened at the university where I used to work. Guy had had a nasty divorce and set up a cot in the basement under the structures lab. Dunno how he tolerated that. It was loud from big ass hydraulic pumps running all the time and probably averaged about 35 degrees Celsius. Plus, the ceiling was about 1.5 meters high, the floor was covered in grime and oil, and the place stank. He was gone before I started, but I heard he'd been living there for a few months before getting caught. At the university where I work, they found a homeless woman living in an unused office. Kind of smart, actually. Not now, of course, with universities shut down. But generally universities are safe places, well patrolled, with clean restrooms and students dropping change and abandoning uneaten food. During normal times, there's always a bake sale or hot dog sale going on. Almost every day there's an organization offering free pizza if you go listen to their talk about HPV, careers, Jesus, or trends in the energy sector. If you get bored, there are free concerts and talks, and no one will notice you in a crowded lecture hall. Or you can just go read books or magazines in the library. Keep yourself clean and tidy, and you can be homeless a long time at a university. I was a recruiter, and you would be shocked to see what some people actually have as their personal email. Most people have come around to using just their name. But then every once in a while you'll have to verify that brown glitter 69 is in fact how they would like to be contacted. I am a teacher. There are a lot of angry parents who are still using their hotmail from high school like Studman 6969 and SuperExaChick 16. OBV fake. Makes it hard to take them serious. I used to work at a staffing agency that placed people at manufacturing positions. Everyone had to be drug tested at the office as part of the orientation. If the pickup came back as inconclusive, we'd send the potential hire to a medical lab. They would take another drug test and the lab could determine if the person was on a prescription or using illegal drugs, and therefore, not eligible for hire. So one guy failed his drug test at the lab. He came back to the office claiming that it wasn't his fault. He explained that he was riding in a car and he stuck his head off the window. Then, when the car passed under a bridge, someone threw a bunch of cocaine off the bridge. It hit him in the face, and he accidentally inhaled it. How did you know it was cocaine? By the smell. Exactly the same high. I hate it when that happens. Imagine his luck if that were actually true. An IT guy who worked the overnight shift, because he was doing support for our Asia, Europe regions, got written up for improper use of company systems. He had dozens if not hundreds of Google image searches related to foot fetish stuff. Like insert celebrity hair feet along with other random stuff like cute toes, etc. Like dude, you're in it. You know this stuff is tracked and that your boss could easily monitor it. Did he get docked any wages for not working or did the company just foot the bill? Guy came into the interview in sweatpants and a hoodie and said he didn't need the job because of how much money he was making illegally, but he wanted to have a job so the IRS didn't get suspicious. Weirdest part is I don't live in America. I very much doubt the IRS cares about Canadian tax returns. Weirdest part is I don't live in America. I very much doubt the IRS cares about Canadian tax returns. Undocumented immigrant? IRS don't frick around, even with foreign earnings. He didn't have any American addresses or jobs on his resume, but I honestly don't believe a word he told me all interview, so who knows. One of the candidates I was interviewing via Skype answered the phone while in his boxers and a tank top, then stood up to grab his blazer that was probably about 3 feet away. I had to see him in his stretched out boxers. Had a peen sight up and open during a shared screen trial to see how well he can use the digital classroom. I had to remind him I can see his screen. He goes, oh yeah, sorry, next. Instead of just closing it from the corner of his partially hidden window, he clicks open the window in full view then closes it. That was nice. Edited to add. No, guys, he didn't get the job. Also, I got an award for this. Thank you, random citizen. Digital classroom. Don't tell me he was interviewing for a teaching position. Yeep. Sometimes I wonder how the frick I can't get a decent job when people have to deal with this. I don't think he wanted to get hired. That all sounds very deliberate. Some agencies that handle unemployment mandate you have to apply, interview for X number of jobs over a period of time. If you don't get hired, but can prove you applied, interview, you can keep your benefits. The new receptionist was coming in every morning and opening up programs, documents to make it look like they were busy, and they'd sit with one hand on their mouse and one hand on their keyboard and stare blankly at their screen for 8 hours a day and not do anything. They'd also consistently pick up the phone and hang it up without saying anything so that it would stop ringing. I sat in on their termination, and the employees started screaming at the manager about how they were doing an amazing job, and they had to give them another chance. I was 100% confident that they were just trying to get some easy money and wouldn't be surprised that they were finally getting fired. The whole thing was just bizarre. They'd sit with one hand on their mouse and one hand on their keyboard and stare blankly at their screen for 8 hours a day and not do anything. How? You'd think eventually just sheer boredom would compel them to do something. Never underestimate how hard people will work to not work. But to do nothing for hours, but staring a blank screen? That's some Zen master monk it. Normally, if given a choice between doing something and nothing, I chose to do nothing. But I will do something if it helps someone else to do nothing. I'd work all night if it meant nothing got done. Had to delete someone from the system following them being murdered. Was a bad day. I had to do that for a work colleague that died in his sleep. I'd spoken to him less than 2 hours before he died. It's a weird feeling. Not human resources, but my first job was for a circulation desk in the library my mother works at. Since she works there, she was able to get me the job. One of the pieces of work I had to do was delete deceased clients from the system. I had to look up all these names and check if they had any outstanding fees or books that needed returned, and if they didn't, then I would delete them from the system. The system hadn't been cleaned in a while, because there were accounts that hadn't been active since the 70s, but there were also accounts that were used just a week ago, all of which had the owner pass away. I tried to just do the work and not think about the morbidity, but it was odd. During an internship, I had to remove an employee's desk phone number from the system after he passed away in his sleep. He sat a few cubes down from me, but I had never spoken to him. No one really talked about his death either. That's how I want to go, unnoticed, 2 cubicles down. I used to work in HR at a large corporation. There was a big HR back office team doing a lot of processing and data entry, including employees' bank info for their salary. It just so happened that on the same day 2 employees with the same name started, and a huge clusterfuck ensued. First, the banking information was entered for the wrong person. One of them realized and had it corrected, but the other wasn't fixed, so both salaries went to one person. The unpaid guy started refusing to come to work, but payroll said that the payment cleared and the account was in his name, so he was terminated for refusing to come to work. He kept calling and the HR support team kept misidentifying him as the other guy who was still working for us. So when they raised a ticket to get his bank information changed, they changed the info of the wrong guy. So now the guy who doesn't work for us is getting paid the salary of a guy who does. When this was finally worked out, the first guy was given his job back, but on his first day back, security misidentified him and issued him a badge of the other employee. So now he was clocking hours for the other guy and not getting paid again, because he never clocked in for himself. It took about 3 months for all this to be worked out. Moral of the story is use a freaking email address to identify people. Ugh, this story frustrates me. I don't have a common name, but turns out someone at my company has the exact same name as me. So when I got hired, they deleted my account because they thought that I was a duplicate employee account. This resulted in getting locked in the parking lot for half an hour until someone came and badged me out my first day after orientation. That was just one of the many issues I encountered. I had a co-worker who was hired as a temp, left for about 6 months, was hired back full time and worked for 1.5 years before his account was wiped because it was designated as belonging to an inactive temp. He had a common name, and apparently about 2 months later, his new account was wiped again after a person with the same name quit. It really put a lot of confidence in our IT system. There are database management people turning in their graves listening to that. Unique identifiers people. There probably was a unique ID for the person. But if you give people the option to search by a non-unique identifier, that's what people are going to do. Why? Because writing John Smith is easier than having to type 1,342,542. Years ago I worked HR for a retail store. A manager would always clock out on time, however the alarm wouldn't be set until about 30-45 minutes after he clocked out. Since we had a lot of trouble with internal theft, we assumed he was stealing. Loss Prevention approved the installation of cameras across all stores, but we were told not to talk about it to see if we could catch any internal theft. The way the ceiling was set up, the cameras weren't too obvious, but if you knew what to look for it was quite noticeable. Anyway, turned out this dude was banging a co-worker who was 16. He was 25 expecting his first child with his wife. I didn't see the footage, but our regional manager of loss prevention did and had to turn it over to the police. The real kicker is the girl's dad was a captain on said police force, who was taking the stuff. A few employees who were promptly terminated. The most common thing they all did was put clothes into bags without scanning the item at the pose. Dudes were walking out with expensive jeans and jackets while only paying for a hat. That manager actually didn't steal any items, so I guess he had that going for him.